So has anyone here ever been involved in planning a wedding? I'm hearing some laughter. Yeah. You know, one of the great big challenges is coming up with that guest list. And then an even bigger challenge we found was the seating arrangement, because this can be really tricky. You see, Cousin Millie and Uncle Louie don't get along, so we can't put them at the same table. And then you have a section of the family, and there are 11 of them, but every table only seats 10. So how do we divide them up and make it seem somewhat equitable there? Then you have the groom's parents are going to invite a couple that they've known for a lifetime, but nobody else knows them. So where do we put them? And then great Aunt Helen from Oshkosh always complains that the music is too loud. So we can't put her too near the DJ. And then we have to figure out what will we do with the pastor. You know this all, don't you? You know, you can't put the pastor with Uncle Bob because he tells off-color jokes, and pastors have never heard. And then you have to go through the guest list and figure out, well, who actually goes to church, because pastors will only want to sit with people who go to church, as if we have nothing else to talk about. And then there are some who just decide, this is all too complicated, we're just going to let them all find their own seats on their own. But that can be awkward then for the guests, especially people who don't know a lot of people. It's interesting to note that guest lists and who was going to sit where was an issue in the time of Jesus. He told a parable after instructing the people who would gather there about weddings. You know, the parables that Jesus tells, there were the people who kind of thought of themselves as being more important than others. And so they kind of want to go sit in the important places. And then there are those who are invited because the host expects that they'll get invited in return. You know, so it's kind of like, you know, I'll do you a favor, you do me a favor. But Jesus brings this home pretty directly. He says, first of all, don't go in and sit where you think you belong. Get invited to sit there. Don't make that decision yourself. And then, look at your guest list. Don't worry about those who are going to, you're going to get an invite back. Invite people who might never have been invited before. Think of the joy that that would bring to somebody who had never been invited to the party, and they got an invitation. Those who are on the margins. The joy that they will have will far exceed any joy that you could imagine that is gained from position or power in society. Today, as we gather on World Communion Sunday, we conclude a three-part series on growing the table larger. Growing the table larger means the barriers of tradition, culture, and doctrine need to be examined, and some of them need to be removed. It requires that fears that we harbor deep within us, fears of rejection or inadequacy, fears of unworthiness, need to be faced so that we can become fearless as we come to the table. We can even leave our fears there. These are some of the outward and inward steps that are needed if we're going to grow the table larger. In this third and final week, though, we focus on a third element of creating a growing table. And that is just welcoming the invitation and accepting the invitation joyfully. I don't know what other people's memories were of Communion Sundays, but for me, I always kind of got the feeling that a Communion Sunday in church was something of sorrow. We heard lots of sorrowful music, and people kind of approached the table with their heads down, and it was kind of not meant to be joyful. And it was a long time before I ever went to a service where I really experienced the joy of coming to the table, the joy that we have been invited. And so I started to look at the joyfulness of invitation. And we see that Jesus has issued at least 4 invitations in the Gospels. The first is an invitation to rest. When he says, "Come to me, all you that are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." Christ welcomes the struggles and the burdens, the pain and the suffering, the fatigue of daily living, the uncertainty of life in general. And he invites us to be yoked to him. Drawing on that imagery of an oxen who with the yoke shares the burden of life. The invitation to rest is an invitation to healing and comfort, to respite from the daily grind, to peace in the midst of what can come close to chaos. It's an invitation to calm in the midst of the storm. A second invitation is one to follow. Jesus says, "Follow me and I will make you fish for people." He issued this invitation as he walked along the shores of Galilee and came upon 4 fishermen, James and John and Peter and Andrew were the ones that responded. There were others there, but they responded. They left behind their livelihood and sacrificed the life they knew to journey with the one who would give everything, including his life, for the sake of others. A gift of love unmatched throughout human history. Jesus invites these 4 to partner with him in building a new way of life, God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. Not among the elite and the powerful, but with the common person, with the farmer, with the craftsperson, and with the fishing community. Jesus offers an invitation to life in the kingdom when he says, "Abide in me as I abide in you." This third invitation is in his final conversation with his closest followers. Jesus is preparing them for a time when he was not going to be present with them. Yet, he wanted them to know that they were not alone and that they would be with him for all times. Life's journey can be draining. In that constant press of a fast-paced world, leaving us kind of spiritually empty and disconnected. And it's hard to feel loved in those moments, especially when our worth is measured by a bottom line of what we produce and not the essence of who we are. Jesus is inviting his disciples to abide in me and I will abide in you. Just simply be as we are, with that inner self-assurance that we are loved as we are. And the final invitation really brings the others together. And Jesus says, "Take, eat. This is my body." And he gives them a cup and says, "Drink from it, all of you. For this is my blood of the new covenant." At the table of the Lord, all 4 of these invitations converge. Welcoming the invitation to the table provides an opportunity to link our lives to the healing, comforting power of Christ, reminding us that as we eat the bread and drink the cup, we literally are bringing the real presence of Christ within us. And with Christ in us, around us, before us, we find the burdens of life are just somehow a little more bearable. Welcoming the invitation reminds us of our call to bring others along on the journey, and that we are partners with Christ in that. Remembering that in the bread that is broken, we join with the one whose body was broken, so that the world might be whole. Welcoming the invitation connects us to the life-giving sustenance of Christ in our everyday lives, so that we might build together the beloved community. It is at the table that we are united with sisters and brothers, some very much like us, some very different from us. Today we remember that Christians around the world are gathering around a table. It's at a table that we're reminded that the salvation of Christ is not limited to those who are like us. Instead, there are people gathering in the great cathedrals in the cities of Europe, people gathering in simple shelters in Africa, people gathering in simple churches built in the Philippines or in Central America. People across this nation in all sorts of churches that look in all sorts of ways are gathering and reminding ourselves together that the salvation of Christ is not limited to us. For God so loved the world and gave His only Son, so that the world through Him might be saved. The one who gave us life, abundant life. We celebrate this day. Pam was somebody I met probably 25, 30 years ago. She's a friend of mine. Raised in a Jewish household in Brooklyn. In her childhood, she walked to school each day, past a parochial school, and there were students and teachers inside the play yard who would see her walk by and point their finger at her and call her a Christ killer. Pam was well into her 50s when I met her and we gathered on a weekend retreat with others who were learning the gentle art of spiritual direction. The closing worship, which was planned by an Episcopal priest, included the celebration of the Eucharist, another name for the Lord's Supper, a good gift that is given to us. And we had done this before, and she had never received communion, but this time as the bread was passed around, she took a piece and she placed it in her hand. And she just kept looking at it. And she'd touch it with her fingers. She'd look again. And finally, she ate that piece of bread. She later explained what was going on. Because there in that moment, she felt healing from the brokenness of her past experience around the church and Christ. She felt empowerment that God was giving her to do God's will and to walk with others on the journey. She felt connected, that spiritual connection with God, who is the source of life itself. Did she become a Christian in that moment? Well, not in our traditional Orthodox way of looking at things. She didn't become a professing member of the church. She didn't do the things that we might think about there. But what happened was that she experienced the real meaning of Christ. She experienced and welcomed an invitation and found abundance in that. And in those moments, experienced what Christ is for the world. Peace and love and healing. This is not a United Methodist table. This is the Lord's table. This is not our table. This is the Lord's table. And Jesus Christ invites all who desire to live with that love and peace, who desire, they don't have to have it right, they just have a desire to want to live with that sense of peace that Christ offers, to come and to feast at this his holy meal. This is the gift of God for the people of God. I can't think of a better invitation that we should welcome and joyfully accept, because the invitation is from Christ.